Okay, so let us continue the topic of registration. If you remember, in the last class, we have discussed section 23. The topic of registration is covered in sections 22 to 30. So there are in total 9 sections which deals with the topic of registration under GST laws. We have covered section 22 already. And what is there in section 22 if you remember? Section 22 talks about persons who are liable for registration. If you remember section 22 carefully, then it says that if aggregate turnover of any person does not exceed rupees 20 lakh or 10 lakh depending upon the states or UT from where I am making the taxable supply, then on this basis I am supposed to take registration. It's compulsory. I cannot skip that. If I skip that registration, then I need to pay or I'll be prosecuted as per the provisions of the GST laws. So the moment my turnover exceeds 20 lakh or rupees 10 lakh in 4 states, Manipur, Mizoram, Nagaland and Tripura, then I have to take, I become liable for registration. But we have another section 24. Apart from 22, we have another section 24, which also deals with compulsory registration. Under section 24 also there are some persons who are compulsorily liable for registration. Then question arises, what is the difference between section 22 and 24? Now, non-technically these are same. Technically there is some difference. A layman cannot understand the difference clearly in section 22 and 24. I would show you again this CGST Act, and then you try to tell me that what is the difference in section 22 and 24. Let me see whether you also can have some look at this point, that what is the technical difference in 22 and 24, because both talks about registration. So let me first share with you the CGST Act. Let me show you the heading of section 22 and then the heading of section 24, and then you also try to analyze that what is the technical difference in 22 and 24. So let me first share with you the act. Now section 22, the heading is persons liable for registration. Persons liable for registration. If you remember, in subsection 1 there were those limits that when the aggregate turnover in a financial year of that person exceeds 20 lakh or 10 lakh in case of states of Manipur, Mizoram, Nagaland and Tripura, then the person becomes liable for registration the moment my turnover exceeds this limit. This was section 22, subsection 1. In subsection 2 also, if you remember, that whosoever was registered on 21st June 17 is liable for registration under GST laws on the next day. That means on 22nd June 17. I have discussed that point also. Then subsection 3 of 22 was whenever the business is transferred, the new person becomes liable for registration, and section 22 subsection 4 was in case of amalgamation and demerger, the date when registrar of companies issues a certificate of incorporation, the new, that means amalgamated company or resulting company becomes liable for registration. This is what section 22 was. This was what section 22. Section 23, if you remember, it was telling you some cases where registration is not required. The following persons are not liable for any registration. This was section 23, which we have already covered. Now I am coming to section 24, and what it says, compulsory registration in certain cases. Now it uses the language compulsory registration. So technically there can be some difference, but otherwise section 22 also says you are liable for registration, and 24 also says compulsory registration. But what is the difference? Now it says notwithstanding anything contained in subsection 1 of section 22. Now what is section 22 subsection 1? it talks about those aggregate turnover limits. So that means in the following cases, it does not matter what is your aggregate turnover limit. Even if your aggregate turnover is only 100 rupees, only 50 rupees, only 1000 rupees, still following category of persons shall be required to be registered under this act. So there are around 11 categories. There are around 11 categories clear cut with names, and 12th category that apart from these 11 also anytime government can notify any other person also who is compulsory liable for registration. So this is the heading of section 24. Now can you tell me what is the difference in between 22 and 24? Anyone who can make a judgment that what is the exact difference between 22 and 24? Can anyone try to tell? What is the exact difference which is looking when you read the act? Or what point can come in your mind that yes, this is the technical difference? Because at higher level, no one is going to ask the questions even if you score good marks or good rank in the entire university, then clerical jobs have no relevance in future. Machines can easily do the job which a human being can do, but the mind jobs or analysis jobs will remain up to some extent. Anyhow, so can you try to tell me what is the difference which comes in your mind when you read the act in section 22, between section 22 and 24? After this, I will tell you. Anyone who can try to make an attempt with that, what is the exact difference which thing is there in your mind between section 22 and 24? Anyone, please unmute and try to reply.
Sir, excuse me. Sir, I'm audible.
Yeah, your voice is not clear. Any other who can try? Okay, so let me tell you. Okay, Sushant, you please try again. Let me see whether your voice is coming or not. Otherwise, I will try then. I will not try. I will tell you then.
Is it better now, sir?
Yeah. Please try.
Sir, I think section 22 is concerned with intrastate supply and section 24 is concerned with interstate supply.
No, actually, your voice was not clear. Anyhow, let me tell you what is the exact difference in 22 between 22 and 24. If you remember section 22, it says persons liable. Section 22 says persons liable for registration. So not by default. This is the difference, that in section 22 a person is not liable by default, but in 24 a person is liable by default. Like in 22, if I'm person and if my aggregate turnover, suppose I'm a supplier in Delhi, and if my aggregate turnover does not exceed, is less than equal to 20 lakh, then I'll become in or not liable. Then I'm not liable. So this person is not liable. I'm not supposed to take registration if my aggregate turnover in the previous year does not exceed 20 lakh rupees if I'm a supplier of Delhi, in Delhi. But in compulsory registration, it does not matter what is my turnover, I by default become liable. For example, just an example, every non-resident, it's an example only, I will show you that in the act, every non-resident taxable person is liable by default. It does not matter what is the aggregate turnover of this non-resident. Similarly, every casual taxable person is liable by default for registration. It does not matter what is the aggregate turnover. So in 22, you become liable when you achieve some criteria. The criteria is aggregate turnover, for example. But in 24, there is no need to achieve any criteria by default. You become liable. That's it. This is the main difference. So technically there is a difference, but both are telling me the same thing. When you get a question or someone asks you that who are the people who have to take GST registration, then the answer is both these sections, 22 as well as 24. In 22, you become liable when you achieve some or fulfill some condition. In 24, by default, you are liable. Please raise your hand if the point is clear. If not, then you can ask me the doubt. In 22, I become liable when I fulfill some condition, like aggregate turnover is very easy example. But in 24, by default, you are supposed to take GST registration, even if your aggregate turnover is only 1,000, 10,000 rupees. Okay, so let me start writing the points of section 24. And I told you initially that you cannot read these 2 or 3 sections in isolation, 22, 23, 24, 25. The better understanding will come when you read these 4 collectively. So no one section is to be read in isolation. It's possible that it depends upon other section also. Section 22 and 24 tells me registration, in which cases I need to take registration. But in section 23, there are cases when registration is not required. So what will happen now? If I only read section 24, then it is incomplete knowledge. Maybe it is possible that within section 24, when the act is saying that these persons are compulsory liable, maybe through some notification exemption has been given to those persons. So all exemptions of registration are given in section 23 only. I hope the point is clear. 24 in the act says that these persons are those who are liable for registration, who have to take compulsory registration. But I cannot read that section in isolation. I have to depend on section 23 also, because section 23 says in any case the following persons are not liable for registration. So that is why I say that read 22, 23, 24, 25 together or collectively. That's it. So let me start writing some simple points. So let me share that. Is the screen still visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let me Explain section 24. Persons liable for compulsory registration even if this is what the heading of section 24, that notwithstanding anything contained in section 22 subsection 1, that means it does not matter what is your aggregate turnover, even if it is less than 20 lakh rupees or 10 lakh rupees, still if you are these people, you have to take compulsory registration. There is no choice to you. So what is that first point? Persons making any interstate taxable supply, this is my first point. So if you are a person who is making with supply interstate taxable supply, then you have no choice, you have to take registration. This is what act says. But I told you, you cannot read 24 in isolation. You have to depend on section 23 also, and 23 deals with those cases where registration is not required. So when I combine the knowledge of 23, I can say that there are some exceptions also. Those exceptions I will tell you later on. Through notifications, we have some situations of interstate supply where compulsory registration is not applicable. Act says that persons who are making interstate taxable supply are supposed to take compulsory registration. But under section 23, subsection 2, there are some notifications which will be used here, because 23 says the cases where registration is not mandatory. So in some interstate taxable supplies, as a person, you are not supposed to take compulsory registration. So those notifications I will discuss with you later on. These are pending. In the next class, I will discuss these with you, because then I will merge the section 23, which is already covered, plus some new notifications also, which will complete the understanding of section 23 altogether. But you must remember that interstate taxable supply, all the cases are not 100% compulsory registration cases. Some exceptions are there for this compulsory registration through notification of section 23 subsection 2. That is for later discussion. Second point, casual taxable persons. No, there are some casual taxable person, that is the definition given in section 2, who are not a regular businessman, you can say. So technical definition we can discuss later on when we'll discuss separately the topic of casual taxable person, but the general layman definition is casual, that they do business only for some specific purpose. It's not a regular business. All casual taxable persons who are making any taxable supply, they are compulsory liable. But again, In this case also I can say that there are some exceptions. And those exceptions are through some notifications. So I have to merge this knowledge also. So this is for later discussion. But broadly, casual taxable persons when making taxable supply are compulsorily required to take registration. But we have some exceptions. Third point. Persons all persons who are required to pay tax on reverse charge mechanism basis. Are compulsory required to take GST registration. And of course, it is logical also because as a supplier, if I am the supplier and if I am making any supply to this recipient, and if this supply is covered under reverse charge mechanism cases, then whose obligation is this to deposit the tax with the government? Recipients. And if this recipient is not registered, how can this recipient deposit the tax with the government? So it is necessary that all persons who are required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism basis must be compulsory registration. But again, it also has some exceptions. Those exceptions are through notifications of section 23 subsection 2. I will discuss that later. So these are first 3 points. Total we have 11 or 12 types of persons who must take registration as per the provisions of section 24. It's compulsory on them. There is no choice. Persons making interstate taxable supply, casual taxable persons making taxable supply, persons who are required to pay tax on reverse charge mechanism basis. Fourth point. Non-resident taxable person making taxable supply. Every non-resident taxable person who is making taxable supply has to take GST registration, and there is no exception in this category. Fifth point. Persons who make taxable supply on behalf every person who is doing the supply not on his own behalf but on behalf of another person. The best example is principal agent. So if Mr. X is the principal, Mr. Y is the agent. So principal Mr. X asks his agent that supply some goods to Mr. K. So Y is not supplying to Mr. K in his own capacity. As an agent of X, Y is supplying to Mr. K. So in this case, this Mr. A must take compulsory registration as per point number 5. Person who is making taxable supply on behalf of other taxable person. So as an agent, registration is mandatory by default. Sixth point. persons who are required to deduct tax at source or tax, you can say. TDS, you can say, tax at source. Just like under income tax, in GST also there is a provision of TDS. In income tax, what happens? Before making payment to me, suppose I am earning income from anyone, then before making payment to me, that person will deduct tax on my behalf. This is what which happens in income tax. And Mr. X and Mr. Y. So I am the employee, for example. So when employer gives any payment, employer will deduct tax at source. So employer will not pay the full payment. Okay, employer will deduct some tax at source and will pay this tax directly to whom? To Government of India. Now under GST laws, what happens? The issue comes for payment. So as a supplier of goods or services, now rather than employer, now who is giving the money under GST? Not the supplier. Suppose X is the supplier and Y is the recipient. So X supplies goods and services and Y gives the payment. Of course, Y has to make the payment, but Y will not make the full payment. Y will deduct. Y will deduct what? Some tax at source. And Y will pay directly this to the Government of India. So here Y is supposed to take a registration. Of course, if Y will deduct tax at source and if Y doesn't have the registration number, how will he or she deposit the tax with the Government of India? That is why this is the sixth category. All persons who are required to deduct tax at source are to take compulsory registration. There is no choice. Next point, seventh point, ISD, Input Service Distributor. As the name suggests, it is not input goods distributor, it is input service distributor. Now what happens so many times? Suppose a company has 20 big showrooms. Showroom 1, showroom 2, showroom 3, showroom 4, and so on. There are 20 showrooms. Now when you purchase anything in bulk, the cost is always less. This is by default. Now these are services. Now every showroom requires so many services. What type of services a showroom can require? Housekeeping services. What type of services a showroom can require? AC repairing services, water purifier services. Okay. Water purifier services, security services. There are so many services required. Now, what a company, for example, X Limited will not allow every showroom to have its own different contracts with different service providers. What X Limited will do, and normally what these big companies do, they open an office and they call that office as what? When I prepare office, always it becomes a hut. I don't know why. So it is not giving you the resemblance of an office, but you assume it that it is the office, and the name of this office is input service distributor. Now what this office will do, this office is not selling anything. Office is not purchasing anything, and if purchasing, office is purchasing only some services to be given to further to its own showrooms. So technically there is no public dealing. Now suppose per year security services availed by this input service distributor from any security agency is rupees 10 crore contract. For example, 18% is GST. For example, 18% GST. So how much tax is paid? Technically, it is around 1.80 crore rupees. It is my tax, input tax, you can say. It is my input tax. As input service distributor, it is my input tax. I hope it is clear. I can avail the input tax credit also. But how can I avail as an input service distributor? I'm only purchasing the services. I'm availing the services. I'm not selling or supplying these. And when I'm supplying these, I'm supplying to my own showroom owners who are technically using these services. As input service distributor, I'm not using these services. Entire security will be sent to showroom 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, etc. Now, when these showroom 1, showroom 2, showroom 3, when these people will show their sales into GST, so this is their GST. You can say this is my output tax of showrooms. Sales into GST will be output tax. From there, logically they should deduct input tax credit on these security services in proportionate basis, because it is logical. Had these showroom people themselves availed these security services, they would have been allowed ITC. When on their behalf the main head office, which is known as input service distributor, is availing those services, then why shouldn't this input tax credit be allowed to these showroom owners? If it is not allowed, then no one will be having input service distributor office, and it is not feasible in real life. In a big company, everyone wants centralized hold or centralized agreement for all different retail showrooms. I'm giving the example of only 20 showrooms. There may be situations where, like you take the example of Jio, Vodafone, Airtel, these are having hundreds of showrooms across the nation. So every showroom owner cannot be allowed to avail different services. Ultimately, company enters into it. So they enter into an agreement with single service providers. They get the benefit of bulk treatment also, where they will pay less amount, and only one agreement is signed. The moment anything happens, the service will now take the simple example of bank. Whenever you go to any bank, ask from any bank manager, if their printer stops working, can they avail the printer services themselves? Answer is no, because SBI head office has directly availed the printing services contract or availed these services. And whenever any bank managers in any bank, any printer problem arises, manager will directly send the request to the head office, and they will send that person from whom they have signed the agreement. That is what input service distributor. This is the concept of input service distribution. It is feasible as well as acceptable as well as prevailing in the real life. So what I wanted to tell you, every input service distributor is supposed to compulsory take GST registration. because if that person cannot take registration, then it is problematic to distribute these proportionate taxes, etc., to the retailers or whosoever are those. So this is the point, that for the time being, till I discuss with you in detail input service distributor, the way of distribution amongst different retailers, etc. Since input service distributor point was covered, so I thought that I should first tell you that what is actually input service distributor. So this is input service distributor. Every input service distributor is supposed to take GST registration. If the concept of input service distributor is a little bit clear, please raise your hand. Okay, next point. Eighth point. So these all are section 24 cases where these persons have to take compulsory registration. Any person supplying OIDAR because of globalization, these things are common. It is online information and database access, retrieval services, retrieve REI. So there is some mistake in the spelling. Retrieval services. Can you tell me the retrieval services? Retrieve RETRE, I think. I need to check. Okay, retrieval services. These are OIDAR services. Because of globalization, so many times different companies have to take the services of online information and database access of other organizations. Now there have been some issues also that Facebook shares the information, Google shares the information, etc., etc. So these are known as what? Online information and database access retrieval services. Now every person who is supplying these OIDAR services from a place outside India, from a place outside India to any unregistered person in India, then in this case, this supplier has to take compulsory registration. Any person supplying OIDAR services from a place outside India to any unregistered person in India has to take compulsory registration. Ninth point, electronic commerce operator, ECOs. Now there are different categories of ECOs. Within ECOs, there is point number 1. Every ECO who is required to collect tax at source. Section 52. Just like I told you, every person who is required to deduct tax at source, it was section basically 51. When you read the act, I will show that it is 51. and it is 50, 52, 52. Every issue is required to collect tax at source. I need to check exactly whether it is 50 or 51 or 52, but these are the three 50, 51 or 52. I think it is 52. So that I need to check, but these are either 50, 51 or 52. Most probably it is 52. Every electronic commerce operator is required to collect tax at source. Now, just like TDS under Income Tax Act, we have TDS in GST also, and similarly, just like TCS under TCS, not Tata Consultancy Services, TCS means tax collected at source under income tax. Same concept of TCS is applicable in case of GST laws also. So every electronic commerce operator like Flipkart, Snapdeal, etc., who are required to collect tax at source, they have to take registration, because when they will collect the tax at source without registration, how they will deposit the tax with the government of India? So it's necessary. Similarly, second point, every ECO through which the suppliers are engaged in intrastate supplies, intra, not inter, in intrastate supplies of selected services. So those I can tell later on. Those are same just like section 9.5. If you remember section 9.5, if you remember section 9.5, what was there in 9.5? There were three services that in section, as per section 9.5, when services are supplied through electronic commerce operator is under obligation to deposit tax with the government of India. But not all the services, only three services are covered in this case. Transportation of passenger, if you remember, housekeeping, and do you remember third one? Do you remember which is that third service? Anyone who can remember this point?
Accommodation.
Yes, very good. Accommodation. In case of these services, whenever any supplier supplies these services, then ECO has to pay the tax. If these people are not registered, this was also mentioned. Anyhow, so not in detail right now, but for the time being, every ECO through which suppliers are engaged in intrastate supply with the following services. Selected means following, the great word, good word is following services. Then in this case also ECO has to take registration. 10th point and 11th, two more are left. 11th is anytime government can notify other persons also. Government can notify other persons also who will be compulsory liable to take GST registration. And similarly, one more category of ECO, it is basically for those persons who are supplying the services through ECO. Persons who are supplying the services through ECO. So this 10th point in detail I will discuss with you later on. It requires further discussion. For the time being, let us skip this 10th point. This 10th point I will discuss with you later on. Here we have some persons who will supply goods and services through ECO. So let us discuss this 10th point later on, because these three ECOs will create a little bit confusion when I will directly tell you right now the concept of ECO, because already there are two types of ECOs, and this will be the third category where ECO will also come. So let me skip for the timing this discussion on this 10th point. Otherwise, there will be three different points where electronic commerce operator word will be used. It will create a little bit confusion. For the timing, let us remain at these two issues. Every issue who is required to collect tax at source has to take compulsory registration, and every issue through which suppliers are engaged in providing these three interstate supply of services: passenger, accommodation, housekeeping, then also this issue has to take a registration. One more issue concept is also there that I will discuss later on. Now, I have told you earlier also, do not read section 22, 23, 24, 25 in isolation. The good knowledge, or you can say comprehensive knowledge, comes when you read all these four together. Because in one section, so many times application of other section is also required. Like when I am teaching you section 24, where these are those people who are compulsory liable for registration, I am taking the help of section 23 also in some cases where they are not liable for compulsory registration. So 24 cannot be read in isolation. I have to take the help of section 23. So 23 is also over, but those notifications which will be used here, that I will discuss with you in the next class, and that will complete the topic of 23 also. So right now, whatever 23 we have covered, it is around 70% complete, 70. Remaining 30% will be complete when I will discuss 23 along with 24, because these notifications are still left to be discussed. These notifications. So I cannot say that right now 23 is 100% complete. I need to discuss these notifications. These are issued under section 23, subsection 2. And this 10th point is no notification, but still I need to discuss this. That's it. So this is what section 24 is. So 22 is almost over. 23 section around 70% over, which we have covered. 23 also you can say around 70% over. And in the next class, I will wind up 23 and 24, remaining 30% portion. Then you can have a discussion on the doubts also. But these have to be read together, not in isolation. So that's all from my side. And in case you have any problem, you can ask me right now. If later there is a little bit confusion, otherwise you can ask me later on also. There is no problem. So if you have any doubt related to today's discussion, where I have discussed with you compulsory registration situations, and I have told you that you cannot read section 24 in isolation. It has to be read along with the notifications issued as per section 23, because 23 deals with those cases where registration is not required. So 23 and 24 and 23 will go simultaneously. That's all from my side. Goodbye, and let us meet in the next class.